The Eternal War. The Eternal War is an all-out conflict waged between two inimical forces woven into the universe in all time, space, and at every scale. Disequilibrium versus equilibrium. In us Homo sapiens. Sapiens, last surviving member of the hominids, these inimical forces demonstrate as diametrically opposed classes of human being. The only two fundamental classes that actually exist: resentfuls and responsibles. Collectively, these two classes comprise roughly half of any given population at any time, with the nature of each the hard-coded product of initial heredity rather than of later adoption, where the default motivation of the former is a deep-rooted psychological conditioning heavily weighted to envy, which leads invariably to acting upon malevolence at every level to assuage broad-spectrum resentment. The default motivation of the latter is a deep-rooted psychological conditioning heavily weighted to gratitude, which leads invariably to the taking up of inviolable personal responsibility at every level. All this began for humans many billions of years ago, with a blast that suddenly created an unrecoverable imbalance in the forces represented and contained the vast information and energies of what was before. From this blast, the near-infinite disequilibrium in immense energies blown outwards by the event, would our universe be born, from which all the many materials that make up life, and even life itself, would eventually emerge. Both the eternal war and its counter, the infinite game, came into being and were woven inextricably together in this vast explosion of information that launched our universe into being. As dissipative structures invariably emerged from the inconsistencies and unevenness in the thermodynamic, informational distributions of disequilibrium. The war and the game launched at the very beginning of all things, as the interplay between dissipative structures and disequilibrium. The eternal war, being that disequilibrium of energy, forces all things into being, while also being that force seeking always to destroy all things. That internal, ruthlessly consumptive and destructive reality ensures we never cease rapidly evolving, and in times of genuine scarcity, reduces our numbers sufficiently such some portion of our species continues. The infinite game, being the never-ceasing creation, cannibalization and evolution of increasingly complex and sophisticated structures to reduce the total amount of local, global, and universal disequilibrium. That internal, infinitely collaborative and expansive organizing force ensures survival of our species, and in times of genuine threat, innovates sufficiently such some portion of our species continues. The hard-coded binary motivation of the resentfuls versus the responsibles, for the former to wage the war and for the latter to play the game, demonstrates as a compulsion in resentfuls to enslave and consume that half of humanity is neither fully resentful nor responsible, while demonstrating as a compulsion in responsibles to bring ever more of this same swath of humanity, adoptables, into the game at increasing levels of skilled and sustainable gameplay. Ultimately, resentfuls and their adoptables look at responsibles and their adoptables. All they see is a spot of darkness in a field of light. In this, believing responsibles and their adoptables to be like the resentfuls and their adoptables. And so resentfuls and their adoptables know they're justified in seeking out the destruction of responsibles and their adoptables, while responsibles and their adoptables look at resentfuls and their adoptables. All they see is a spot of light in the field of darkness. In this, believing resentfuls and their adoptables to be like the responsibles and their adoptables. And so, responsibles and their adoptables know they're justified in not seeking out the destruction of resentfuls and their adoptables. Both are utterly wrong, as what is in motion, the war and the game, predate humans and life itself, and are together the fundamental property of existence. All-powerful forces which drive all life forms down the path of either stagnation and extinction, or evolution and survival. Recognizing and accepting, and in failing to do so, this godlike force we often call fate determines the way in which the war and the game inescapably shape the lives of all of us. Regardless whether a resentful, responsible, or adoptable, The war and the game are waged upon or played with and within each of us, according to 13 doctrinal domains, each being comprised of their own principles and rules, with each conducted according to its own line of effort. Not any of which is the product of prior rigorous intellectual pursuit, rather instead being nothing more than emergent properties of existing. It is identifying and understanding each doctrine and corresponding line of effort is the purpose of this book. Though a brief introduction to resentfuls, responsibles and their eternal war and infinite game is in order, of course, prior to just such discussion on doctrine and lines of effort.